Hi, this is Alan Cabanis here with my explanation for my solution for the fourth assignment for distributed systems. I'm going to start with my messenger with files program, and then I'll go into my separate threading file called receive messages. So for messaging with file, here we have a connect to server, which will get hit when it's a server program versus a client one. There's listen for connection. Here's just like a thing where something messes up, it throws that. The usage tells you how to properly use it if user uses improper usage. This prompt interface is a function I made so that the user could select M, F, or X. It just tells them kind of what the options are. I have it commented out now because I didn't want that printing out in the received file for when it gets checked against the already set files. So then it's, yeah, if it's M, it's message. F, it returns F and X. And here down in my main, I just do some imports. I get the length of the options on the command line. And then here, like if it's tell it to act as a server false, so it starts at that state. And then if the number of arguments is 3, which means it would be a server, then it changes act as server to true. Otherwise, it's going to stay false and be as a client. So the server is currently none. I eventually just use that as a local host. So it act as server true, then it listens for connection because its server's just waiting to hear. And from receive messages, which is my other file, import its class receive messages, and then I start that up. And then just constantly while true, it's just waiting, or like so it'll wait for an input for the user from the prompt interface, flush the standard out, and then it'll wait. So after it gets the M or the F or or not the X, but it'll then input and wait for a file name or a message respectively. Then if it's not a message, it'll break. And then what I do, I created a tuple of the type of message and as a message or file. And then in this case, I just use the char M or F. And then the second part of the tuple is the actual message itself, whether that's a message or a file name. And you'll see how that's handled on the other side in a second. So then I try to send that. If there's an issue, exit, and then try to shut down, otherwise pass. And here in my thread, so I start up this class, and it's a thread so it can run separately, and it's a daemon. And then I initialize this client socket. So then run, just constant while true, which is similar to what we saw during class in some of the examples. This just constantly runs and waits for a message to be received. So what I do, I receive 4 bytes because if it is going to be a file, then those 4 bytes are going to be the size of the file, and that would be otherwise it's going to need more, or it would be too much if I received otherwise. So then if there is message.bytes or a message bytes, then if the first character is ASCII code 40, which is a left fifth parenthesis, which means it's one of my tuples that I made, then I receive the other remaining 1020 bytes because normally you receive 1024 bytes. So I just append those back together and make a 1024 byte like nothing ever happened. And then so if it is a tuple, this is just this is kind of redundant checking, but it is some other form of checking here. I'm make sure that the type of my message once it's decoded is a tuple because that's what I want it to be. So then I try to just decode it and set it as this message bytes variable again. And if there's value error, then which sometimes happens when I was doing file names, I'm not quite sure why, so I just error handled it to a value error. So instead of evaling, then it was already is in a tuple form and not a string. So then if the first item of the tuple is M message, then you just print the message. And then if it's an F, then the file name is the second item, the sub one. And then file stat is we get the stat of that to see if the size, see if it's more than 0. We open the file, which would be whatever the file name was there. And then I send the file in my send file function, which I'll get to, with the client, the size, the file, and the file name. And then otherwise, yeah, if that's not there, then send nothing because it's not right. And then there's another thing I made called T, which we'll see in a bit. That's essentially a way for me to transfer the file name from the from one side or from one threading file to another. It's not it was just something where I found it difficult to send the file name back and forth. It wasn't reading in off a standard in, so I made this workaround. And then if it's none of those, then there's a wrong option selected. So then this is back for, so if it wasn't a tuple, then it's a 0. That means that it's a is a size, a hexadecimal number, file size, then that's where we get into if it's receiving actual parts of a file instead and not a tuple. So the file name here is self.filename, which I received higher up here, I remember, yeah. And then the file size bytes is the same as measures.bytes. Then if that, then we unpack it so we can continue forward from just the size, and then it receives the file. So it's yeah, well, once it says that it's gonna get a file, it starts receiving that file from the file name here. So then these are just a bunch of otherwise print these out, which realistically in the test cases it doesn't hit, and then close the sockets and exit if there's bigger errors. So then the send file, what it does, it sends this thing I made called T in the file name, so I can just send that, and then it knows how to receive that and set that as the overarching file name. Yeah, up here in the self.filename, the global for the class. So then I sleep for a second, otherwise the messages got a little too jumbled up together, and then pack it, and then sending it the bytes and the 1024 bytes. And then while true, it just keeps reading in bytes until the end of the file, and then if it's still valid, then it'll just keep sending files or sending the bytes until the file is done, and then it closes up. If there's no file, it means that there was a 0 byte issue with the file. Didn't have anything in it, so that's an issue, and that just prints out that it was empty earlier. Then my receive file function, it sets a timeout for the sockets because I was having issues where here it would just hang here indefinitely. So I said, oh, okay, I'll make a 2-second timeout just to make sure that everything finishes up. So then I open the file name, open the file name that I was received in the function as one of the parameters, and then while true, we just keep writing that, and then once it times out or hits properly at this break, then everything closes out and the file is received, and that should be on both sides and identical. So that is my assignment. I received 12 points out of 14. There were just a few errors with sending messages after a file was sent and received. But there you go. Thank you.